So here's a little history lesson I've told you before, sometime in the past. My coming of age as a follower of Jesus, it didn't happen right away. Even though I was raised in the traditional white American church of wooden pews and Sunday school and church potluck dinners. It was more routine for me growing up rather than something that really grabbed my heart. And it wasn't just my spiritual life, but my whole worldview was rocked by what we historically, at least in the church, historically refer to as the Jesus People movement in the late 60s and early 1970s in Southern California, which is where I'm from. That movement, the Jesus People movement or the Jesus Revolution, it was something that transcended denominational and theological loyalties. There were young people of all different persuasions that were part of that movement. It was a cultural phenomenon. And I believe, looking back on it, a genuine awakening of the Spirit of God that crossed racial and economic and age boundaries. It was a spiritual revival in the midst of the Vietnam War era and the end of the civil rights movement in the late 1960s. And I was in high school. For some, if anything at all, what happened in that time period is really just a historical anecdote. Pictures of long-haired hippies getting baptized in the Pacific Ocean. A new style of rock and roll music being ushered into church life and starting worship wars that still exist today, some 60 years later. If it weren't for that movement that openly welcomed barefoot, shirtless surfers into their church services, on Sunday mornings, no less, I'm pretty sure we would all still be in coats and ties and ankle-length dresses and fancy hats for our Sunday bests. So we can say we owe that movement at least that. For me, though, that era, it turned my world upside down and completely changed the trajectory of my life, like for good. Because it was there that I learned to take the words and the life of Jesus seriously. It was there that I experienced a life of following Jesus that was modeled after the priorities and lifestyles of those very first disciples who followed him. And later, the values of the early first century church recorded specifically in the book of Acts, but then in those letters that were written back to that first century church by the early apostles. It was during this time period that the Bible became alive to me. It was there my love and commitment to Jesus' Sermon on the Mount as his manifesto, this blueprint for what it was going to mean to call myself a Christian. Well, it was where that was really born. The Sermon on the Mount is recorded in Matthew chapters 5 to 7. Is it a word-for-word transcription of a sermon that Jesus actually preached? I doubt it. It's, at a minimum, it's not long enough. There's a lot of in between the lines we have to consider, where I'm pretty sure he probably did more explaining there when he actually delivered it. But I think what is recorded is both spiritually transformative as well as practically descriptive of the life of a follower of Jesus. We can trust it. It's reliable. And right in the middle of the Sermon on the Mount, we read these words. Matthew 6:33. But seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. I believe with my whole heart that this verse, that one verse, is the defining statement of the whole sermon. What the whole sermon is about, what everything in the sermon points to, and ultimately what everything that is meaningful to the life of the disciple of Jesus comes down to. It's in that verse I find both my ultimate purpose and honestly the end game of everything that I have done in my life. That verse is my motivation. It's my goal. That verse removes all divided loyalty for where my ultimate allegiances lie. The words that lead up to seek first the kingdom, well, those words are the heart, the most difficult and uncomfortable and challenging and life-giving part of the sermon, those early verses leading up to Matthew 6:33. I'm not going to read them here, but just a few of them. As Jesus spoke, his words spelled out this radical, upside-down, new way of life he expected his followers to adopt. He taught them to be poor in spirit instead of proud or arrogant or superior. He taught them to pursue humility instead of pursuing strength and power. Because he knew them. They wanted rule. They wanted an earthly kingdom of control and power. And he was never about that. He taught them to be pure in heart and single-minded instead of entangled in all of the affairs of society. Even saying it right here seems so foreign and so ridiculous. He taught them to be peacemakers instead of being angry and anxious and full of vengeance. He taught them to be friends to everybody. Everybody. What? Even today, we battle over that. He taught them to rejoice in trouble and suffering and difficulty instead of running away and complaining or seeking personal comfort. He taught them to be the salt of the earth, lights to the world, not targets or lightning rods, because of our arrogance or pride or judgment or hypocrisy. And what is so awesome is that all of that is in the Sermon on the Mount and so much more. Remember the Lord's Prayer? In the Sermon on the Mount is where he taught them. He taught them to revere the name of the one true God. He taught them that his kingdom was not out there somewhere, but it had come to earth. His kingdom was to be here, now, for them, for us, to you, to me. Eventually, in the Sermon on the Mount, he came to the subject of money and possessions and priorities. It always does. There is such a great one-liner that exists in our culture. And it is so true. Follow the money. Follow the money. You're going to find out what is really going on. The reality, the economy is what life is all about for the majority. Maybe all of us to one degree or another. We work for money. We live for money. We think about money. We think about the things that money can buy. We never have enough money. It's kind of funny. We never have too much money either. If someone says they don't care about money, let me give you a secret. Don't believe them. They are not telling you the truth. Everyone cares about money. That's why Jesus addresses it right here in the Sermon on the Mount. He says this just before Matthew 6:33 that we just read, down in verses 19 and 20. Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but lay up for yourself treasures in heaven. Don't store up treasures on earth. Could that command be any more clear? Look, the Bible doesn't condemn hard work. The Bible doesn't condemn pay or wise investment or taking care of your family and responsibilities and taking care of the poor and the less fortunate and owning things and even enjoying what God has provided. That is all spoken about in the Bible. But Jesus' words are do not, and if we were to say the most accurate translation right there, it would be don't treasure up treasures. Don't store up and accumulate treasure for yourself. And the problem with that teaching is that it flies in the face of everything that we are taught, everything that we have modeled, everything that we see on television and is glorified in our culture. And as sad as this is, we see it glorified in the church day after day after day. It's the world I have lived in my whole life. It's the same one you have lived in. And that is get more, get bigger, get better. You deserve it. And that's why this teaching is so important, so radical, so upsetting. The temptation is to see treasure, both money and possessions, and everything that comes with it. The temptation is to see it as security. The things we believe we need the most for a happy, fulfilling life. And it sure seems like that is true. But Jesus says, beware of that deception. Because money and the things that money can buy, well, they're not permanent. Moth and rust will destroy them. It can all be gone in a moment. It's all temporary. In fact, we are temporary. And we live as if both go on forever. So Jesus says, store up treasures in heaven. This is what seeking the kingdom of God first is all about. It is being rich in the things of God. And look, it's not easy. It's investing in the eternal. Investing in a life that begins now and lasts forever. It's pouring out our time and our money and our possessions and our reputations and our energy for the good of others and the good of God's kingdom and His reputation and not our own. That's what it means to store up treasures in heaven. It's having our schedule and our spending habits and our relationships and all the things attending to that part of our life, have all of that be shaped by the Sermon on the Mount and not by the Bill of Rights or by a commercial at the halftime of the Super Bowl. Matthew 21 says this, "For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." What a fitting way to end that section in Jesus' teaching. And maybe even what a fitting way to end right here. It's a pretty blunt statement. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. It's a measuring stick. It's a barometer of the soul. This statement is just a simple way of determining where you stand before God. Where your treasure is where your heart is. Your treasures reflect what is most important to you. Look at where you spend your money and your time. That is what means the most to you. That's where your heart is. As you live out your days this week, hopefully the very real presence of Jesus in the bread and the juice that represents His blood that was lost through His death on the cross, His body that was given for you and for me. As you walk your days this week, my challenge to you is spend some time thinking about those things in your life that are competing for your singular allegiance, that you owe simply to the one who has set you free. Yeah, it's a battle. Pretty much everything in life is pulling against it. But I'm convinced He's pulling for you. Remember Him this week.